3 feet of muddy water rushed through the cul-de-sac, carrying away lawn flamingos, Amazon packages, and Brenda Felter's personalized golf cart like they were bath toys. The cart, which had custom spinning rims and a vanity plate reading Hobos, tumbled end over end before lodging itself upside down in what used to be the community rose garden. As firemen canoed down Elmwood Lane, navigating between floating recycling bins and someone's inflatable unicorn pool float, I stood calmly on my newly constructed dam with coffee in hand and binoculars around my neck, watching the self-declared HOA Emergency Command tent collapse in a soggy heap. The tent, which Brenda had purchased with HOA funds for exactly this type of situation, proved remarkably unsuited for actual emergencies. Technically, I warned them. Technically, I filed all the permits. Technically, this was their fault. Especially after they fined me $50,000 for unauthorized water retention. I'm Miles Bickford, a semi-retired hydrology engineer who moved to the sleepy mountain suburb of Fernale Oaks for peace, fishing, and the occasional beaver sighting. After 30 years of designing flood control systems for major cities, I thought I'd earned the right to a quiet life by the water. My property backed up to a seasonal creek prone to erosion, the kind that swells during spring rains and dwindles to a trickle by August. So, as any responsible man with access to hydraulic modeling software would do, I built a modest, code-compliant retention dam. The structure was beautiful in its simplicity, just 12 feet wide and 4 feet high, built with interlocking concrete blocks and a spillway designed to handle a 100-year flood event. I'd even added fish ladders for the local trout population. Enter Brenda Felter, HOA president and self-described aqua vigilante. She ran the HOA like a water cult with everything bottled, branded, and always 3 degrees colder than reality. Brenda once fined a teenager for excessive slip-and sliding, claiming it violated the neighborhood's water waste ordinance during a week when it had rained for 6 straight days. She called rain gutters unsanctioned water conveyors and tried to mandate that all homeowners install her brother-in-law's overpriced gutter guards. When she discovered my dam during one of her property surveillance walks, which she conducted twice daily with a clipboard and a measuring tape, her eyes lit up like she'd found buried treasure in the form of a violation. 2 weeks after I built the dam, Brenda showed up at my gate in galoshes and a visor that said "Drain the drama." She was accompanied by her assistant, a nervous man named Gerald who carried her briefcase and constantly apologized for existing. She spoke in a shrill voice that could pierce concrete. "You've created a rogue lake," she hissed through perfectly whitened teeth that had to have cost more than my dam. "You're redirecting the HOA's atmospheric drainage." I calmly pointed out that I had city permits, Army Corps clearance, and an actual doctorate in civil engineering from MIT. She waved dismissively and handed me a fine for $50,000, citing aesthetic disruption, unauthorized shoreline, and latent pond vibes. I asked her what latent pond vibes even meant. She said with a condescending tone that if I had to ask, I was already guilty. Gerald nodded sympathetically at me when she wasn't looking, then quickly pretended to study his shoes when she turned around. Then she began sending drones marked with HOA stickers to monitor aquatic expansion. These weren't cheap drones either, but military-grade surveillance equipment she'd somehow convinced the board to purchase using emergency funds meant for earthquake preparedness. One crashed into my solar panel when I was adjusting my spillway controls. The thing sounded like an angry hornet before it smacked into the panel and fell into my tomato garden. She invoiced me for the damage to her drone. $700 for what was essentially a toy helicopter with a camera. When I refused to pay, she added late fees that compounded daily. Finally, she hosted an emergency HOA town hall in her driveway, complete with foam core diagrams that looked like a middle school science project and a DJ playing Enya. She'd hired a professional sound system and erected a stage made of rental scaffolding. She stood at a podium she'd rented specifically for the occasion and declared in a dramatic voice that my dam represented an existential threat to property values. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation with animated transitions and sound effects. Neighbors nodded along, some holding signs that read "Stop the Splash" and "Dams Destroy Dreams." One woman brought her own gavel and banged it on a folding table every time someone tried to speak in my defense. Brenda petitioned the county to declare my dam a flood risk. She submitted photos showing my waterline supposedly touching HOA fences. She'd created an entire binder with color-coded tabs, laminated pages, and a table of contents that referenced subsections of subsections. The problem was her measurements were upside down. She'd literally held the measuring tape the wrong way and photographed it as evidence. When I pointed this out to the county inspector, he laughed so hard he had to excuse himself from the room. He returned 5 minutes later with tears in his eyes, still chuckling. But Brenda wasn't deterred. She hired what she called an independent hydrology expert who turned out to be her nephew who'd taken one community college course in environmental science. Still, the HOA issued a formal demand stating remove the dam, or face collective enforcement. She tacked it to my mailbox with waterproof epoxy, making sure it would survive any weather condition. She also mailed copies via certified mail, posted it on every telephone pole in the neighborhood, and even paid for a small ad in the local newspaper. I sent them one final certified letter warning them clearly. If you interfere with my spillway, I cannot guarantee how the runoff will behave. The natural water flow follows established patterns that your illegal landscaping has disrupted. I included technical drawings, flow rate calculations, and historical precipitation data going back 50 years. They laughed at the next meeting. One guy wore waders as a joke. Another brought a toy boat and pretended to row it across the conference table while humming the theme from Jaws. Someone had made t-shirts that said "Damn you Miles" with a cartoon of me looking villainous. Brenda said with mock concern that perhaps I needed to review my engineering degree if I thought a little water could cause problems for their perfectly maintained properties. She suggested I might be suffering from dementia and offered to recommend a good neurologist. That was the final straw. I filed an official report with the county detailing every single HOA violation I'd documented over the past year. 137 violations in total, each photographed, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with the relevant county codes. I submitted video evidence of their illegal berms, their unpermitted retaining walls, and their redirected drainage systems. I had drone footage of my own, showing how they'd systematically altered the natural watershed to divert water away from their properties and onto their neighbors. Then I made one final adjustment to the dam's automated spillway regulator, which again was completely legal and approved by every relevant authority. I set it to release at exactly the rate specified in my original permit application. The next heavy rain came hard on a Tuesday night. The Weather Service had issued warnings for 3 days, but Brenda had called them alarmist fearmongers in an HOA newsletter. Thunder rolled across the mountains like bowling balls in heaven. Lightning lit up the sky in sheets of white fire. I monitored the reservoir levels from my home office, watching the digital readouts climb steadily. The rain gauge showed 3 inches in the first hour alone. When it reached the warning threshold at 2:47 a.m., I activated the spillway exactly as designed. The gates opened with mechanical precision, releasing water at the calculated rate of 800 gallons per minute. The water flowed through the designated channel initially, following the path established by decades of natural flow. But Brenda's HOA had built illegal landscaping berms and fake decorative retaining walls directly in the natural runoff path. These obstructions, which violated county water management codes, redirected the flow. They'd spent $200,000 of HOA funds on these improvements without a single permit. Nature, assisted by gravity and perhaps a small degree of righteous spite, found its own way. The water surged with the force of inevitability. It bypassed their illegally altered terrain like a river reclaiming its ancient path. The first berm collapsed at 3:15 a.m. with a sound like a giant stepping on a sandcastle. It flowed across 7 front lawns, turning them into temporary rice paddies. The Johnsons' lawn, which they just had resodded at $4,000, became a pond complete with their garden gnomes now serving as tiny islands. 3 prize gardens, including Brenda's collection of imported Japanese maples that she'd bragged cost $1,200 per tree, became aquatic features. Her special turfgrass, which she'd bragged cost $8,000 to install and required a specific pH balance maintained by monthly chemical treatments, peeled away like old wallpaper. The crescendo came when Brenda's basement, which she'd converted into an unauthorized wellness sauna lounge without permits, filled with 3 feet of creek water. The Himalayan salt wall she'd installed dissolved like a giant bath bomb. Her collection of healing crystals, displayed on custom-built shelves, became an underwater treasure hunt. She called 911 screaming about domestic terrorism, but the dispatcher, who'd also been fined by Brenda for having a mailbox 2 inches too tall, took her sweet time forwarding the call. HOA board members stood ankle-deep in their own mess as county inspectors arrived at dawn. The team consisted of 6 officials, including an environmental scientist, a water rights attorney, and a criminal investigator. The team was led by Deputy Marla Quinn, who'd been fined by Brenda years ago for moss vibes on her roof. Marla took one look at the HOA's illegal landscaping, the unpermitted walls, and the redirected drainage systems. She pulled out her clipboard and began writing with the enthusiasm of someone who'd waited years for this moment. She documented every violation while Brenda followed her around, alternating between threats of lawsuits and attempts at bribery. She announced in an official tone that carried across the waterlogged street, "Congratulations, you've illegally altered a protected watershed. You've also violated the Clean Water Act, state environmental protection standards, and about 47 local ordinances." The fines came swift and harsh. $300,000 to the HOA for environmental violations. Individual fines of $20,000 to each board member who'd voted to approve the illegal landscaping. Additional penalties for falsifying documents, as they'd claimed the work was just cosmetic maintenance. Brenda's face went from red to purple to a shade of white that matched her bleached teeth. She stammered about conspiracies and hydraulic warfare while the inspector continued writing citations. When Marla handed her the personal fine of $75,000 for multiple violations, including falsifying county documents and illegal construction in a watershed, Brenda's knees buckled. The inspector then informed her that the falsified permit applications she'd signed constituted felony fraud. She collapsed onto her soggy lawn, her drain-the-drama visor floating away in the receding water, screaming that this was entrapment while the inspector calmly informed her she also faced up to 3 years in prison for the falsified documents and an additional 5 years for criminal fraud involving the misuse of over $200,000 in HOA funds.